They thought she'd be easy to ignore, the quiet black woman marrying into a billionaire dynasty. At their table, she was overlooked, undermined, and elegantly disrespected. But what they didn't see was the storm she was quietly building. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She wrote. And when her truth hit the world, it didn't just shake their empire, it exposed every lie they'd built it on. Stay with this story, because the way she reclaimed her worth will haunt the people who underestimated her for the rest of their lives. She stood still at the edge of glass, overlooking the shimmering London skyline, her reflection merging with the towering buildings beyond. Chandra Thompson, 34, was the picture of elegance in a black silk dress, yet her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the velvet box in her hand. Inside lay a pendant, her mother's. A simple thing. Brass with a chipped edge. Nothing like the diamonds glittering in the ears of those she was about to dine with. But tonight wasn't about jewelry. It was about proving, yet again, that she belonged. Chandra wasn't new to success. She'd earned her MBA from the London School of Economics while working nights, had built a non-profit that helped inner-city girls find mentorship and funding, and still found time to write poetry her friends swore had saved their lives. She didn't chase wealth, she built legacy. Yet here she was, invited into the home of the Pickfords, a dynasty that believed legacy was born in blood, not built by sweat. She was engaged to Ethan Pickford, the heir. Polished, kind, a man who read Baldwin and said things like "My family can be old-fashioned, but they'll come around." Ethan believed in her. Loved her. But sometimes, even love comes wrapped in a kind of silence that makes you doubt your own brilliance. The penthouse door swung open behind her. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his voice a little too light, like he was trying to reassure himself more than her. He looked perfect. Classic tux, hair combed like a Kennedy. She smiled and took his hand, the box still in her other. As they entered the marble-drenched dining room, the temperatures seemed to drop. Tall windows framed the London eye like a painting, but inside, cold eyes followed her. "Chandra, darling." Vivian Pickford, the cousin. Manhattan-born, dripping in old money and understated cruelty, leaned in for a kiss that missed the cheek entirely. What a stunning dress. Vintage. Her smile lingered, sharp as glass. Chandra thanked her. She was used to this. The half-compliments. The microaggressions gift-wrapped as politeness. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. The guests were mostly family, each one with a net worth that could fund a continent, and none of them knew that Chandra's first job had been bussing tables in Brixton. That she once skipped meals to buy textbooks. That she buried her mother at 20 and never cried at the funeral because tears, she'd learned early, didn't move systems. Vivienne sat across the table, swirling wine in a crystal glass. "So," she said to the room, eyes glancing off Chandra like she wasn't there, "when exactly is Ethan taking over the foundation? We need someone who understands tradition, don't we?" A few chuckles. Not loud, but enough. Chandra placed her hand on Ethan's. He didn't say anything. Not yet. That silence said everything. Inside, something old twisted. That quiet little voice that whispered, "You're a guest. Don't make them uncomfortable." But this time, it was met by another voice, older, firmer. Her mother's voice. "Dignity is never handed to you, baby. You have to carve it out with grace so sharp it cuts." Chandra smiled. Not because she was happy, but because she finally knew. This wasn't their world she was entering. It was hers they were walking into. And they had no idea what she was about to do. The laughter at the table was polished, expensive, controlled. But to Chandra, it felt like broken glass under silk gloves. Every time Vivian opened her mouth, there was a new cut. And they were always just deep enough to bleed, never deep enough to scream. "I mean, Ethan," Vivian purred, "remember when we went to Cannes and you dated that girl from Nice? What was her name? Lucy? Or Luna?" She gave a playful glance toward Chandra. "French girls just have this effortless refinement." Chandra didn't move. She didn't blink. Her face stayed neutral, like armor trained over years of surviving rooms like this. But her stomach curled inward, coiling like a spring held too tight. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Vivian, come on." "What?" Vivian replied, with a dazzling smile. "I'm just reminiscing." Chandra's fork paused midair. She saw the way the others around the table reacted, not in outrage, but in that complicit quiet. A few awkward chuckles. Some exchanged glances. No one challenged Vivian. Why would they? She was the niece of the matriarch. Born into the house. Her privilege didn't need justification. It was inherited. As the night wore on, the passive aggression sharpened. Talk of family history. Pickford lineages. Great-grandfathers who built the empire from nothing, ignoring the colonial threads woven into that wealth. Chandra listened, face calm, heart pounding. She wasn't just being excluded, she was being erased. Made invisible in real time, inside the life she was told she was welcome in. Then came dessert. Vivienne raised a crystal glass and cleared her throat. To Ethan and Chandra, she said, tone sugar-sweet. May their future be bright, and may she find comfort in the traditions of this family. They can be quite demanding, but don't worry, she's tough. Right, Chandra? There it was. The dagger behind the toast. Ethan's hand gripped hers under the table, a silent apology, but it felt too late. Too performative. Because not once tonight had he spoken for her. He deflected, softened, downplayed, but never defended. And in that silence, Chandra saw the uncomfortable truth. Love without protection isn't love. After the party, as guests filtered out and the servers began clearing the remnants of lamb and wine, Chandra walked alone to the veranda. The city lights below shimmered in indifferent beauty. She rested her hand on the pendant still tucked beneath her dress. It felt warm against her skin, like her mother was near. Vivienne followed. You know, she said softly, voice barely audible over the city wind, I tried. Really? I gave you a chance. But this world? It's not yours. It's never been. You think education and charity make you one of us? Chandra didn't respond. Vivienne stepped closer, tone now dipped in poison. You don't belong. And one day, Ethan will remember who he is. What he comes from. This is temporary, Chandra. You're temporary. She left her standing there, alone, breath shallow, heart fractured but not broken. Back in the guest room, Chandra sat before the mirror. She removed her earrings, her makeup, her mask. Her eyes stared back, glassy, but focused. And in that reflection, she saw the girl who fought her way through every room that told her she didn't belong. She had been asking for space at their table. But now? She would build her own. One where legacy wasn't bound in lineage, but in truth. The foundations they sat on? They were about to crack. They just didn't know it yet. London rain was different from New York rain. It didn't scream against the windows. It whispered. That night, as Chandra rode home alone in a town car, Ethan choosing to stay behind under the pretense of family matters, the rain tapped gently on the glass, like it was asking her something. Are you going to keep letting them rewrite you? She didn't answer. Her hand rested on the pendant again, her mother's. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting in the kitchen of their council flat, watching her mother boil water for tea on a stove with only one working burner. That woman had never once let life make her small. Even when the world told her she was nothing more than a cleaning lady, she carried herself like royalty. Never let their wealth make you question your worth, her mother used to say. They can own everything and still have nothing if they've never had to fight for it. Chandra took a deep breath. This wasn't just about Vivienne anymore. It wasn't even about the Pickfords. It was about every boardroom where she was the only one. Every cab driver who questioned if she lived in the neighborhood she was dropped off in. Every snide glance when she used her own name to book a reservation. It was about years of shrinking to fit into rooms never built for her, of mastering accents and silences, of laughing off insults to keep the peace. And she was done. The next morning, she woke before dawn. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the soft morning light as her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, her hands shook, then they didn't. She began to write. Not an email. Not a complaint. Not a diary entry. A manuscript. Behind the empire. It wasn't revenge. Not in the way people think. It was revelation. An unfiltered, unflinching account of what it meant to love someone powerful and still be treated as invisible. Of what it felt like to be examined but never embraced. Of what dignity looks like when no one else sees it. She didn't use names, but the details were unmistakable. The heir. The cousin. The foundation. The dinner. And herself. The girl from South London who rose not by privilege but persistence. She wasn't writing to expose. She was writing to exist. Fully. Unapologetically. Over the next few weeks, while Ethan sent half-hearted texts and excuses, it's complicated. Vivienne's just under pressure. You know how family can be. Chandra built something lasting. Her day job didn't suffer. She still crushed quarterly reports, delivered TED-style pitches, mentored her interns. But every night, her fingers danced across keys like a woman possessed. And then, a twist that no one, especially not the Pickfords, saw coming. One of the editors who'd attended the dinner party, Vivian's friend, had overheard a remark Chandra made in the kitchen that night. Just a line. They always assume you want to be them, when all you want is to be left alone. That editor, jaded by the world of elite publishing, tracked her down. He didn't want a ghost-written memoir. He didn't want a sanitized version of events. He wanted her voice. Raw. Intelligent. Human. The manuscript was fast-tracked. The cover would be simple. No jewels. No castles. Just her name. Chandra Thompson. And a title etched in truth. Behind the Empire. A storm was coming. Not with thunder. Not with screams. But with something far more terrifying to the powerful. A black woman telling her story with nothing left to lose. By the time the first bound galley copies of Behind the Empire arrived at Chandra's doorstep, the early buzz had already begun. Whispers. DMs from editors. Late-night emails with subject lines like, "Your words shook me." And all without one social media post. She didn't need noise. She needed truth. Chandra stared at the matte black cover in her hands, her name etched in minimalist silver. It felt heavier than any degree, any ring, any applause she'd ever received. Because it wasn't just a book, it was a reclamation. A quiet form of revenge that didn't aim to embarrass anyone. It simply made her undeniable. Ethan still hadn't read it. They were still engaged, technically, but he was retreating. With each chapter she wrote, he pulled further into the orbit of his family. He said he was navigating the politics, said he was trying to fix things. But Chandra had stopped waiting to be chosen. She chose herself. Vivian, on the other hand, caught wind of the book through an art collector friend who thought it was fiction. "It's brilliant," they'd said at brunch, between sips of champagne. The emotional intelligence, the surgical way it captures entitlement, chef's kiss. Vivian smiled tight. "Really? Who wrote it?" "Some girl." Chandra Thompson. That was the first time Vivian's hand trembled holding her glass. Still, she underestimated it. Until the reviews started coming in. A blisteringly honest narrative about love, race, and inheritance of power. The most emotionally intelligent debut of the decade. She doesn't shout, but somehow, the silence is deafening. Then came the panel invitations. Private readings. Mentions in literary columns. And then, a call from a New York-based nonprofit asking Chandra to headline a global women's summit. The same summit Vivian had been declined from 2 years earlier. Chandra hadn't planned to attend. But now? Now, she had reason. The day of the summit, she wore white. Not ivory. Not champagne. White. Unbothered. Unapologetic. As she stepped onto the stage, Vivian watched from the front row. Her eyes were narrowed, but her smile stayed frozen. For once, she didn't have a MIC. She didn't have the room. Chandra did. "I was told once that I was temporary," Chandra began, her voice smooth as velvet and firm as stone. "But legacy isn't decided by last names. It's decided by truth. And sometimes, the ones they try to erase become the ones history remembers." The room fell silent. Then erupted. Vivian couldn't meet her eyes. And Ethan? He never made it to the summit. A voicemail, left hours before her speech, simply said, "This is bigger than me now, isn't it?" He was right. But the twist wasn't that Chandra got revenge. It's that she never needed their world to begin with. She had built her own. And they were now visitors, guests, watching her empire rise without ever realizing when the foundation began to shift. Chandra never raised her voice. She simply raised her value. And in doing so, buried theirs in silence. The Pickford boardroom was a cathedral of legacy, oak-paneled walls, oil portraits of stern men with soft eyes, and a chandelier imported from Austria, just because it could be. And today, it would serve as the stage for something none of them anticipated. Chandra entered not as a fiancé, not as a guest, but as a force. The meeting had been scheduled under the guise of clarity. In truth, it was a reckoning. The Pickford Foundation's trustees were concerned. Too much attention. Too many questions. Investors wondering about the girl in the book. Their perfectly curated image was unraveling, not because of scandal, but because someone dared to tell the truth. Ethan was already seated at the long, polished table. His hair looked tousled, like sleep had been scarce. He stood when she walked in,
"Sean," he whispered. She didn't respond.
Just took her seat. Back straight. Eyes forward.
Vivienne was there too, of course. She wore navy.
Always navy. Serious, cold, expensive. She glanced at Chandra, then at the trustees. "Well," she began, "we're all aware of the situation. And while I respect everyone's right to creative expression, the family name is at stake. We must consider how to move forward without further distraction."
Distraction. That was what they called her truth. A trustee cleared his throat.
"Miss Thompson, Chandra, your book has created a stir. Ethically, professionally. The insinuations.
The parallels. Would you be willing to temper things?
Publicly."
Chandra looked at him. Then at Vivienne. Then, finally, at Ethan. "Is that what you want?" she asked him softly. Ethan hesitated. His voice cracked.
"I just want peace." "Peace," she repeated, "isn't the absence of discomfort. It's the presence of justice."
She rose. Walked to the screen at the front of the room.
With a remote, she pulled up a slide, just one. A quote from Behind the Empire in bold letters. "They ask for silence, not because they seek peace, but because your voice reminds them of everything they've stolen and never earned."
Gasps.
Someone shifted uncomfortably. But Vivienne stared, unmoved. "Let's be clear," Chandra said, voice steady. "I didn't use names.
I didn't have to.
The truth has a scent. And it's finally reached the marble halls." She turned to Ethan.
"You said you loved me.
But every time I needed you to speak up, you sat down. Not because you didn't care, but because you cared more about keeping your place at their table."
Tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't know how to fight them," he said.
"You didn't have to fight them," she whispered. "You just had to stand beside me."
Silence.
Vivienne broke it with a scoff.
"So, what now?
You think you're some kind of symbol?" "No," Chandra said, collecting her bag. "I'm not a symbol. I'm a storm. And I didn't come to take your seat. I came to make sure no one else begs for one ever again."
She walked out without slamming the door. Because storms don't need to announce themselves.
They just leave everything different after they pass. In that room, Ethan's crown, the invisible one he'd worn his whole life, didn't fit anymore. And for the first time, Vivienne looked around and realized. Chandra wasn't the one who didn't belong. They were. The world didn't end after that boardroom meeting. It just changed. Slowly. Quietly. Irrevocably. In the weeks that followed, the Pickford Foundation tried to regain control of the narrative, but the story had already escaped their hands. What started as literary acclaim for Behind the Empire became something far more dangerous to those used to controlling perception, resonance. Book clubs in Brixton and Brooklyn were reading it aloud. College professors were assigning chapters in ethics classes. Black women who had built empires in silence finally had language for their experiences. It was no longer just a book. It was recognition, long overdue and desperately needed. Chandra didn't chase interviews. She declined television appearances, refused to be boxed in as the voice of the moment. Her power wasn't in spectacle. It was in stillness. In a calm so complete, it disarmed even her critics. She moved back to her flat in East London. Same neighbors. Same morning coffee from the Somali-owned cafe down the street. But she walked differently now, shoulders relaxed, gaze level, energy unmoved. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Ethan reached out once. A letter, handwritten. He apologized, genuinely. Told her he understood now, though he wished he had understood sooner. "If I ever build anything again," he wrote, "it'll be from the ground up, with people who don't need to shrink for me to rise." She cried when she read it. Not because she wanted him back, but because it meant he finally saw her. And sometimes, closure is just someone finally seeing what they once refused to face. She never wrote him back. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to stay closed. Vivienne? She stayed in New York. Word had gotten around. She wasn't cancelled. People like her rarely are. But the invitations shifted. The energy changed. Behind smiles were now questions. And behind handshakes were reservations. She wasn't the threat anymore. She was the cautionary tale. 6 months later, on a quiet September evening, Chandra stood backstage at the Royal Festival Hall. She was about to give the keynote speech for a global summit on economic equity, ironically, the same one Vivienne had once tried to gatekeep. She wore a floor-length burgundy gown, her mother's pendant resting against her chest. A calm came over her, not nerves, not pride.
Something deeper. A peace earned, not given.
As she stepped into the light, the applause didn't hit her like a wave.
It wrapped around her like a homecoming. She smiled. Not for the cameras. For herself.
4 years, she began, voice steady. I walked into rooms hoping to be enough. Enough for the job. Enough for the relationship.
Enough to be invited back.
And one day, I realized I was measuring myself against people who inherited power, not built it.
Who confused access with excellence.
I stopped asking to belong, and I started building.
She paused, letting that truth settle. I don't want your crown.
I don't need your approval. I am not a guest. I am the architect.
The audience rose. Not because she raised her voice, but because she reminded them of their own.
Later that night, alone in her flat, she poured herself a glass of red wine.
The city hummed outside.
She lit a candle, sat at her writing desk, and opened the pendant again. Inside, where the picture once was, she'd placed something new, a polished mirror. A reminder that the legacy she carried didn't belong to the Pickfords.
It was older.
Deeper.
Wiser.
It came from women who bent the world without ever asking it to notice. Women who turned erasure into echo. Women who didn't just survive storms. They were the storm. And now, so was she. Power doesn't always announce itself, and neither do the people who carry it.
Like this story? Hit like.
Someone out there needs to hear it, share it with them. And for more stories that turn silence into strength, tap subscribe. Now, tell us in the comments, what's the most powerful thing you've ever done without saying a word?